Hello and welcome back to Evil Economics. This is part 2 of our presentation on the horrific crime of the Sun Gym Gang. If you missed last week's episode, be sure to click the link on screen so you can catch up to speed. If you have watched it, then strap yourself in. This is part 2 of the horrifying crimes of Daniel Lugo and the Sun Gym Gang. Though nervous initially about Schiller's escape, after a month passed with no visit from the police and making several trips to empty Schiller's safe of 10 grand, his credit cards, and jewelry, Lugo became emboldened and moved into Schiller's house. Lugo, as usual, was using another's bank account to store his ill-gotten gains and used Delgado's name to lease an $80,000 Mercedes. Carl Weeks was paid half of the $100,000 that was promised to him and Stevenson Pierre. However, Pierre would only get $30,000 as he was absent the night that the attempted murder went down and repeatedly failed in Schiller's kidnapping. You would think that your neighbor and his family disappearing, then a group of men moving in and helping themselves to his belongings would have alarmed somebody in the neighborhood. But in this case, Lugo simply stating that Schiller had gotten into trouble with the US government and had been deported with his home seized was enough to ease suspicions. In spite of the recent deluge of wealth he had acquired, Lugo couldn't kick back and enjoy the high life as he was still on probation and knew his parole officer could come by the Sun Gym at any time. However, in his time off, Lugo enjoyed a life of excellence. Already plotting a new kidnapping and extortion, Lugo spent Schiller's cash freely, making nightly trips to strip clubs with his best friend and buddy Adrian Doorball, and regularly running up large tabs. Unknown to the gang, however, in New York, Schiller was recovering from his injuries and contacting his financial institutions to locate his money. He was in shock to find that his banks had paid out money based on his signatures alone. Regardless, he planned on seeing his family again after the painstaking ordeal he had been through. But before he left, he gave a call to his detective, Ed Dubois, who had advised him to flee. Dubois was surprised by Schiller's call, as he had doubted the story. But Schiller began going over the bank transfers of his property and accounts to various Sun Gym members and his home to a Bahamian corporation he had never heard of. One name mentioned stood out: John Meese, the accountant who notarized the signatures. Dubois decided that his investigation should start with Meese, whom he was familiar with as the two had offices across the street from each other in the past. Dubois set up a meeting with Meese and handed him a letter from Schiller accounting the suffering he had gone through. As Meese read through the letter, Dubois studied the man's face. Meese read through the letter, then remarked that Schiller had, quote, had a rough time, and asked why Dubois was here with the letter. At this point, Dubois asked if Meese knew Lugo or Delgado, and to his surprise, Meese said yes. He explained to Dubois that he was Lugo's employer, and that Delgado was a member, but said that he didn't have a clue what any of this had to do with him. Dubois presented a quitclaim deed to Schiller's home, and a MetLife insurance change of beneficiary form. Both were notarized by Meese. This snapped Meese to attention, and he mentioned that Lugo and Delgado had brought by a Latin American man with them last month, and perhaps this was who he was referring to. Dubois then asked if there was a woman with him, and pointed out that Diana Schiller's signatures were on the documents, even though she had left the country on the 18th of November, and the documents were dated the 23rd and 24th respectively. Meese looked puzzled, then agreed to set up a meeting with Lugo and Delgado to sort through things. A few days later, Dubois met with Meese again in the precinct. Delgado was late to the meeting. Lugo never arrived. Delgado asked to see the paperwork Schiller had been forced to sign. "This is all over a business matter," he said, attempting to brush things off. "Is it customary in your business dealings to kidnap someone, keep them hostage for a month, beat them, torture them, try to kill them, then blow them up?" Dubois asked. "I'm not going to comment on that," was the response from Delgado. Dubois went on to accuse Delgado of attempting an almost perfect crime. He and Lugo had gotten Schiller's house, his money, and had run up tens of thousands of dollars in credit card charges on Schiller's accounts. They had done everything perfectly, except for one thing. They failed to kill Schiller, and now they were going to go to prison for what they did. This brought Delgado to flush, and soon the man wanted out of the room. He agreed to another meeting the next day, and said that he'd be sure to bring Lugo this time. The next day, however, Dubois and an associate arrived to an empty office. Mies arrived an hour and a half late and acted confused as to why Dubois had even come, but assured him that Delgado and Lugo were on the way, and gave him access to an office until they arrived. Foolishly, however, Mies had set the two detectives up in the room that Lugo used as an office, and in the trash can under the desk was an envelope that contained the Sun Gym's financial statements. The statements would later be used in courts, as they were records of the checks to different gang members, including a cashier's check that Mies had made, paying off Lugo's settlement from his 1991 fraud. Eventually, Delgado showed up alone, and when Dubois began making accusations, he stated, "I'm not going to get into that with you. We're going to give you Schiller's money back, the $1 million. Delgado then laid out a plan to have Schiller sign a form saying the kidnapping had never happened, and that he would repeat the story to no one, especially not the police. Dubois was taken aback. On the one hand, he had the gang confessing to the crime, but on the other, they had Schiller's money, and any legal action could result in the gang spending Schiller's own action on defense against him. Dubois said that he would talk to his client and took a draft of the agreement with him. But Dubois worried as he left. Even if Schiller agreed to the terms, and they gave him his money back, they had a taste, and next time, they'd be sure to finish the job. Schiller would consult an attorney, a prosecuting attorney, who said the silence clause in the agreement was unenforceable, and immediately afterwards he could go to the police with the agreement, which amounted to a confession. There were several days of faxing back and forth, but eventually the deal fell through, and the gang rented a U-Haul that they used to empty Schiller House of any belongings that they wanted. Frank Griga was the son of a Hungarian diplomat, and socially active in Miami's Hungarian migrant community. He had successfully set up phone hotlines for boats, automobiles, and most lucratively, a phone sex hotline. His business earned him and his business partner an impressive $3 million in 1993 alone, and when Adrian Doorbal began dating an ex-girlfriend of his, this made Griga the Sun Gym gang's next target. Lugo and Doorbal began getting together a new team to pull off a kidnapping similar to Schiller's, but found themselves rebuked by Mario Sanchez, who was integral to kidnapping Schiller, along with Carl Weeks, who felt like other than the $50,000 they had paid him, the deal hadn't done much to improve his life, and believed that they would be planning on killing him along with the Hungarian. Eventually they would turn to Lugo's girlfriend, who believed that Lugo was working for the CIA, and that Griga was under investigation for exploiting women, especially immigrants from Hungary. She was concerned about kidnapping Griga's live-in girlfriend, Kristina Furton. However, Lugo played this off by saying that she would alert other members of Griga's operation if she was allowed to escape. The gang contacted an acquaintance of Griga's named Attila Wayland and mentioned a plan to set up phone lines in India. The details were vague, but Wayland had been eager to go on a business deal with Griga for a while, and this lucrative deal might be a way into Griga's inner circle. Wayland brought up the deal at Griga's 33rd birthday party, and he agreed to meet with Lugo and Doorbal the next night. Frank brought his girlfriend along with him for the business dinner they had planned. Unfortunately for the two of them, the restaurant they had planned on going to was closed, and this fast-tracked taking the couple to Doorbal's apartment. Doorbal turned on the 50-inch TV he stole from Schiller's house, and turned up the surround sound while Lugo took Griga to another room to discuss the phone lines. Griga mentioned that if they were interested in cell phone towers in Southeast Asia, he might be willing to invest more than $1 million. A few moments later, Kristina Furton rose from her seat as she heard a commotion in the next room. She ran over to it in spite of Doorbal's objections and was met with a scene of absolute horror. Her longtime boyfriend was covered in blood, as was the entire room, and Lugo was viciously beating him. She screamed as Lugo locked Griga in a headlock and began strangling him. Doorbal was quick to tackle her, shackle her, and cover Furton's eyes and mouth with duct tape. He then took a syringe of horse tranquilizer and injected her with it, causing her to go limp. He then injected Griga with a second dose of tranquilizer. Lugala and Doorball were elated. They had their second victim ready to take to Delgado's warehouse to extort the same way as with Schiller. But when they took a closer look at Griga, they saw that they'd gone too far, and the man was dying. After having extorted Schiller for his entire net worth and failing to kill him, they had failed in the exact opposite manner. They killed Griga without getting a dime out of him. The next morning, Delgado was called to the warehouse for damage control. The air conditioning was on full blast. Doorball was injecting Furton with tranquilizer and interrogating her in her delirious state to get the codes to Griga's safe and security system. They also called another Sun Gym member named Raimundo Gonzalez, a sworn police officer and self-proclaimed expert on body disposal. They offered him $9,000, a gold Rolex, and a $250,000 Lamborghini in exchange for his services. Gonzalez came to the warehouse and surveyed the scene. Furton was still twitching. "Take care of the girl," he said, as he surveyed the scene. "Once she's dead, I'll come back and do the disposal." Doorball inserted a syringe into Kristina's ankle, and she stopped moving. Thank you for taking the time to watch part 2 of our presentation on the horrific crimes of the Sun Gym Gang. Sorry we weren't able to fit the whole rest of the story in this week. This has been a little bit more engaging of a subject matter than in weeks past, and reporting the facts. Please join us next week as we go into the gang's attempts to cover up their crimes and their eventual arrest and prosecution. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We will see you in the next one.